how to use custom shapes to create displacement maps in Photoshop and create a variety of different displacement maps. I've just got an empty document there. It's 1600 by 1600. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just quickly create a new guide layout via the View menu. And I'm going to go for 4 and 4. Don't want a very complex guide, but I want a guide so I can add my custom shapes in an organized way. So there's a custom shape tool, and go and select a custom shape. Now your design, your set of presets may be different. 2020, it was changed. So if you've got 2019, 2018, it will be slightly different, but you should be able to access things such as the arrow designs. If you can't find those, you need to bring in the legacy shapes, and you can find that via the right side menu of the custom shapes panel. Now, of course, you could use your own custom shapes. You don't have to use one of the predefined presets. Now I'm going to use this guide to drag out, and I'm using pixels option for the shape, and I'm using black for the color, and it's going onto a white background. So I've just created it in that central part, and those 4 cells, and leaving the cells around the edge empty. There's a command called offset, and you can find that in filter menu, other, and offset. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use -800 or +800, doesn't particularly matter, 800. So to offset it, and also wrap around. So you can see now the arrow has been wrapped around. And what you can do, you can enter some space into that space in the center now that was originally around the edge. And you can drag into there. Now you don't have to be perfectly accurate, but if you want it to be uniform, you can. Now, of course, I could fill, say, one of those cells instead of 4 and create much more complex design. The key thing here is view and snap. Make certain the snap is on. So they should snap to those guides. Once you've done that, file and save. Save as. Because what you want to save it to is a PSD document. PSD, a Photoshop document. Yeah, it says Photoshop. That's what you want. And I'm going to save it to desktop. Now you could save it, of course, to a folder. Create a folder, displacement maps folder, where you keep all the displacements, maybe with some subfolders, maybe arrow displacements, blurry displacements, whatever. So you could create a structure. You can then go and look for those PSD files. But as long as it's a Photoshop PSD file, click Save. Because unfortunately, the Displace feature does not accept all formats, like PNG, etc. Why? I do not know. You'd think by now it would, but Displace has not been updated for ages. So that's been saved. And of course, I'm going to go other examples later. So I'll create a whole load of Displace ones. So filter and filter gallery. And I just want to quickly show you, before I go to the Displace one, you can also use displacements in other places. There's a section there, Distort. What you can do, you can go to the Distort section, and then you can select Glass. Initially, that doesn't look like it accepts displacements, but you can, because you can use it in the texture section. You can modify all the various settings there, but you can go down that right side menu there. So instead of using frosted, right side menu and load texture. Now that might be different. The drop down used to have an option to select it. So select the file and open that. And that's added as your displacement map. Removing the previous one. Now you can create multiple glass effects. And there's a couple other filters as well that use this feature. And you've got scaling here. This is something that's slightly better than the Displace, which does not have scaling. Unfortunately, the scaling is quite limited. This goes 50% to 200%. I'm going to cancel. I don't want that, but I just wanted to show you that you've got the scaling option in there. It's weird, some applications that have got displacement map do have that sort of feature, scale and other options. But Photoshop hasn't updated it for ages. I'm not certain why, because it's a very useful filter. Now you could do your displacements on multiple layers, so you could have 3 or 4 layers, Now I'm just going to go with just one in this example, but you could use multiple. And also what you can do, if you wish, layer smart object and convert it into a smart object. The reason about smart object is you can always then go back to it and modify it at any point. You can go and remove the smart filter. So if you want to get rid of displace, you can get rid of it. So you can go to the filter menu and you can go down to distort and you've got displace. It's the top item. And it puts it over there, I want it over there. Okay, once you've actually got that, and there's a number of options, but there's not many, and there's no preview. This is another area that has not been updated for ages and ages. So when you change the scale, you can change vertical scale. You don't have to keep them the same. I have a tendency to always keep them 50-50 because I've designed the design with that intention, but you could have 50-10, minus 20, whatever. You could do a whole range of different things. So you can change them to 230. But I'm just running through these various options. I'm going to go for tile mainly. And I could use the stretch. I very rarely use the stretch option, and I'm using wraparound. But you could use some of the other ones as well. And I'm going to go through some of these examples so you can see the effect. Once you've done that, what you can do, you can select the file. And there's the displace. And it just shifts it. Just shifts the whole thing. And of course, sometimes it's probably nicer to actually apply it maybe with low settings. So like set it to 2 and 2 or 100, 100, depends what you want. But you can apply maybe subtle shifts and you can vary them, of course. And of course, you can vary the displacement map that you use. And of course, you can run it again. And again, it will ask you the file you want to use. So you could, of course, select a different displacement file. This time I'm going to use the same one. And it's applied again, and you can see it shifted again. And you can see the displacements there. What you can then do, you can, of course, deselect the smart filters. You can also deselect the individual entries. So you can go to that displace and say, I don't want that anymore, so I can remove it. And that's all via the layers panel. So just click that eye and then it's removed. And you can click that eye and that will be removed as well. If you double click on it, you can then edit it, but it will come up with a message. You can also change the blending mode as well in the right side. There's an option for that as well. But you can, if you decide you want to change, maybe use repeat edge option, or maybe use the stretch to fit. You can vary it, or go and vary the setting. Maybe use 20 or 10 instead, or 100. In this case, 10 and 10. Once you've done that, click OK. And again, unfortunately, it doesn't keep in mind the original file, which is very odd. And you can see it's more subtle, a subtle effect. And of course, you can bring the other one back in, and you can, of course, go back and double click the entry and re-edit it. So if you want, go back to 50-50 or 50-20, you can. And now here's the original displacement map. Or what you can do, of course, you can modify that if you want to, because sadly there's no scale feature. And the only way around it I can see is to use the option there. I'm going to go for pixels, is to use the image size in the image menu and just resize it. Click OK. And there's the design there. Now you could use patterns. And now with the latest version of Photoshop, you've got a patterns folder. And you could store patterns in there, and you can drag from there and add them in very quickly. So you could store all your displacement map as a pattern file and then bring them in that way. And I might do that in another video to show you a quick thing. Now I'm saving that smaller file there. And the one thing about the patterns is, of course, you can always resize a fill layer and then use that. So that's another option. And maybe that's another one for a second video on the similar sort of subject. So now you've got your displacement map, which you've resized. You can then, of course, bring it in. So filter menu, distort and displace. Go through all those settings. You can change them. Don't have to use 10 and 10. Again, 30 and 40, 50 and 50, or 100 and 100. Again, tile, repeat. And embed file data in Smart Object. Don't ask me. No idea. Doesn't seem to do anything. However, I'm certain it does. Open. And then you got it. Because, of course, it is a smart object. You would think it would remember the file. But it doesn't seem to. Maybe that's my misunderstanding of what that functionality means. So you've got your displacement map applied now to that image. And you can see the image has been displaced. Obviously, some of it has stayed in the same position, but some of it has been displaced. And, of course, the small scale you can see, and the smaller size, you can see more of those arrows instead of obviously the bigger one, but it didn't. And of course, another thing you can do, you can always save these to maybe your library. So you can create a library. There's the window and libraries. Just simply save these files to a library. And then you can bring them back at any point. And then reuse them very quickly as a displacement map. Now I'm going to show you an example of just applying random arrows. Now, of course, I'm using arrows in this. But, of course, I could use balloon shapes. I could use people shapes. I could use circles, dots, triangles, whatever. And you can mix and match. Of course, you can change them in all kinds of ways, add different arrow designs, maybe rotate the design and then add the arrow designs. Maybe use opacity when you add the designs. You've got blending modes there. You could use blending modes such as like lighten or darken. Of course, changing the color, because you don't have to use black. You could use grey, and then you can use blending modes then and opacity, just to add some variation to the displacement. Now, the arrows that are applied in grey or lighter grey will displace less. Obviously, the white doesn't displace at all. So you just got your there. So you could, if you wished, fill the whole design with a grey and then apply with that. And of course, you can see now I've got all my arrows going in that same direction. But of course, I say you could easily rotate via the image menu, go and rotate the design. Now you can use offset again from the other menu. And you've got your design. Now you've got that empty space in the middle. And if you want, you can, of course, continue to fill. Now you don't have to, you could use, doesn't particularly matter. You could use reds as well into this as well. I'm just not doing that. I'm just using grayscale. And you can continue to do that. You can fill the entire screen with a variety of different arrows. Again, I say rotate them if you wish. Now you could, of course, add them as shapes. Now I'm adding them at the moment just as pixels, but you could add them as shapes. And then you can, of course, rotate the shape or distort the shape or warp the shape. So there's a variety of different designs you could create from that. Now I'm saving this one, file and save, as a PSD file. So I've got this displacement map. And again, I can go back to that gradient. And of course, I'm using gradient, but it could be a standard image. It could be type. Could be a variety of, or a face, whatever. You can use those displacement maps, or maybe something very simple, maybe a rectangle, and you can distort that. I'm using 100 there. But I could use 30 or 200. And you can also use the up-down arrow keys to change the scale. But again, unfortunately, there's no preview. So that feature would be really wonderful if you could actually have some scale and changing the preview as you change it. Perhaps using the displacement map within the structure of that so you could see a preview, etc. I'm not sitting there 200, so you can use 200. Click OK and apply it now. And again, you could change it, stretch to fit, and so on and so on. Again, select the file you just created, displacement file, click open. And there's the design. And you could apply it once, 3 or 4 times, 10 times, whatever. And that obviously would, because it's a smart filter, it would just keep adding additional entries there to the smart filters, which you can then remove. But of course, you can apply it just as a basic layer. Don't have to have it as a smart filter. Smart filters are just handy because you can remove them at any point. But you can just flatten the entire thing. I'm just going to go flatten it, make it no longer a smart object, and I'm just going to apply the displacements just as a standard filter. And you've got it there. Just filter, displace. And the good thing about that, it won't bring up the panel. So if I go filter displace again, filter displace, and you can keep applying it 3 or 4 times, 10 times, and you can create a very weird and wonderful distorted design that may or may not be what you want. But if you want an abstract design, that's pretty abstract from that simple basic arrow design. I'm undoing those. What you can also do, you can use selections. Now you can apply, create a selection, and you can apply a displacement map to that. But you can also invert that selection. So you've got select and inverse, and then you can go to displace, and then you can create a lovely frame effect. So you've got your inner picture, totally untouched, but you've got the outer picture now being displaced, but still remains with the current colours and design, so you can still see an interesting design around the edge, but you've got your central image totally untouched. And of course you can create more complex selections than that. You can use lots of different tools to create different selections and use displacements with those instead. I'm going back to a fresh document again for the displace. And I can change the colour. Maybe go for black. So that's a full-on displacement. Now I can apply a displacement just to that. I don't have to fill the entire document with displacement. And the one thing about when doing this now with the custom shape tool is that it will, obviously the displacement is cut off. So if I'm using, say, one of these arrows, I'm just going to use that arrow. So if I apply it, obviously the arrow isn't generated over the entire thing. So you can create some interesting, more unusual shapes by using that. And of course you could fill that design with a solid colour or maybe a gradient. Doesn't need to be a solid colour. It could be a black and white gradient going nice graduated, or maybe with columns. And you can of course add a selection somewhere else. And you don't have to add a rectangular selection. Of course, you could use circular as well as a more irregular selection. And again, you can change the colours and change the opacity, change the way it's applied, the blending modes. So you can just keep adding different designs. And then that design can then be saved as a PSD file and used as a displacement map. Now, also what you can do, of course, you could apply maybe some blur effects. You could create that design there on a layer, create it on a layer, and then add some say, a style to it. Maybe use gradients or strokes with a shape burst to add some slight blurring. Now I've saved that file and save. So it's saved as a PSD file. Now I can use it as a displacement. Now I can use selections in here as well, so I can just apply it as a selection. But also I can do it obviously to the complete design. File and distort and displace. But what you can also do, of course, before you do any of that, because I've got a bit fed up with just looking at that gradient, I can of course make some variation, some distortion. So I'm just adding a quick distort and twirl. So you've got just a twirl there. Now go to the distort and displace. And then you can set, I've got 200 there, but I could use different values. Or I could use the same, with tile, etc. And I use that displacement I've just created, that one with the selection. And you can see then it's displaced in a slightly odd way. It does create an interesting variation the way it distorts it. But you can see you can use selections to create some very interesting designs. And you can undo again. So you can go back to a fresh document again and create another shape. Now this time I'm going to use shape. The great thing about shapes is you can distort them, modify them, move them, reposition them, add them with gradients. Something you can't do with a pixel, which I've never understood personally. I wish the pixel option should be able to add it with a gradient as well. But you can't. So the only way to do that is via the shape, or you could of course use a selection and then fill the design with that gradient as another option. So you can select that displacement file, and I'm going to use it 5 because I've just saved that one. Now that's just saved, it's got nothing else, it's just the gradient itself. And now I can use it there. So again, filter and distort and displace. Again, use exactly the same settings, or maybe you can change them 10, 20, whatever you want to do. Maybe go with 50. 50 is probably a more average value. But you could use 10, up to you. Maybe use this time, I'm using stretch to fit. It's nice to change things and just try out different things. Wrap around. Click OK, and then select the file you just created, which was the gradient design, the arrow with the gradient. And you can see now the result of that. And it shifts it, it's got an edge now, which maybe you don't want. And you can apply it obviously 3, 4, 5, 10 times and just shift it like that. And of course, you can always undo or use the history panel to go back. So filter and distort and displace. Maybe use repeat this time, or tile, and click OK. And again, select the same file, and you can see the design there. So you can create a whole variety of different designs. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to that displacement map. And I'm going to add style to it. I'm going to have a drop shadow. But you could, of course, go to the layer panel, layer menu, and then add a bevel, drop shadow, glows, whatever. There's a whole range of different things. Or you could duplicate the design. You can resize it, rotate it. You can also blur it as well. So you go to filter menu, blur, and now what happens then, it will be converted into a smart object. That doesn't particularly make any difference to the point of being a design that you can use as a displacement map. but it's stored in the current document as a smart object now. So I've blurred that design, that lovely gradient design there. And of course, like I say, I could duplicate that layer, make multiple copies of it, fill the entire image, or I could just go to the layer menu and layer style, and I can add a drop shadow. But I could also add bevels, contours, strokes, etc. Maybe use the shape burst. File and save, so I can save it. Maybe I'll flatten it just before I do that. I'm just going to go to File and Save. And save it this time as Displace 6. And again, you can go back to the original image there. And again, go to Filter menu and Distort and Displace. But you might, like I say, just want to use it with one of the other ones, the filter gallery and the glass. Go with the same settings or change them, up to you. Click OK. Again, select that file and open. And you can see now you can create a really, the one thing when you start introducing that blurring effect and the shadows and things with a slight blur is you can create some very abstract designs. And you can apply Displace multiple times and you can see what you can generate is quite a unusual abstract distortion of that design. And you can apply it 3, 4, 10 times and it sort of looks like it's sort of in a wind direction. It's been dragged or melted, pulled along. And of course you can vary the displace. You could use -5 and 20 so you can make it go in different directions. But also what you can do, of course, is you can simply go to the image menu and you can rotate it. Maybe go 90 clockwise. So the design is going that way. And then, of course, you can continue to use Displace the same settings, the 50 and 50. And then you can distort it that way. But you could, within the Displace, go and change the values to like -10, 50, whatever, and use different settings. And you can create some very extreme. Now, what you could do, of course, is you could save that as an action. So you could, all those displacements could be saved, stored away in an action via the Actions panel, record them, and then you can then, of course, any design you apply, you can then just quickly apply this sort of effect. And it's all stored away and used in the action. I'll just undo that. And of course, another thing you can always do, of course, is you can always use the Edit menu and Fade. So you can fade the result as well. So Filter, Distort and Displace. Got the design there. Click OK. Again, I could vary it, minus whatever, 20, 30. Select the file again. Again, it's always annoying that you have to select the file again. Makes no sense why you have to keep doing that. Edit and again, fade displace. So what you can then do, great advantage, which is something that should be, I think personally, in all of the filters, is a feature for the blending mode difference as well as opacity. I'd love to see them in every filter. Sadly, you have to go to the fade and do it that way. And also slightly confusing opacity, I would say fade strength in there. Anyway, I'm certain people will argue about that. So you can create some very interesting designs like that. You can click OK or you can just cancel, but you can set it to lighten and you can see the result of that to create a more weird sort of smeary effect. Sadly, when you apply the displace again, you have to go again back to the fade. So it creates, by not having the blend mode within the filter effect itself, means you have to keep doing another operation each time with the fade. That's the way it works. Of course, you can undo that again if you don't want that, but it creates some nice, interesting, blurry effects there for that displacement. And of course, you can combine. I mean, I'm using just arrows, but I mean, I could combine with many other designs. And I can use other arrows, of course. So I can create maybe a very thin displacement. Don't have to create. Now I'm going to go up to, I'm not going to have a gradient there. Just going to have a solid color. And again, I can vary the grey. I don't have to use grey. I can use black. I can use very, very light grey, and so on and so on. And you can just add the arrows just in a very narrow area of the design. Now, I don't want all the rest of the document. You don't have to have the whole document. I've gone for a square document. You don't have to have a square document. Now, I've got my crop tool tucked away, but you can quickly go and crop the document. So just crop it like that. Press return. And you've got your design. And then you can save that as a PSD file. So file and save. Save as. Save it as a Displace 7. Very inventive names, of course. Then you go back. Obviously, the crop tool is still active, so I don't want that. And what you can then do, of course, you can go to Filter menu and again, Distort and Displace and select that thin design. Okay, use the same settings, stretch, etc. Tile. I'm using wraparound, repeat edges. Just test them what you find works for you. I personally generally use wraparound. Click OK. Select the file and then click Open. And you can see then you create this very, very subtle shift as it goes across. And you can apply it multiple times. And you can see the design. And you can create quite an abstract, painterly-like effect. Now, of course, what you can do, you apply this displace over and over again to create this sort of nice distortion. You can always go to Filter menu and Stylize. And maybe use oil paint, or maybe use some of the other pen features, whatever, in the filter gallery. Now, what you can also do, you can also rotate that design and then apply the filter displace again to that. And you can see now the result of that. So you've got it in both directions now. Create that really nice distortion or displacement. And there's lots more things you can do with displacement maps and ways of creating them to create some really amazing designs. And again, like I said, the key thing is you can also save them to actions. So you can create a whole library of actions that are displacement map just simply by adding and recording that, which you can then, of course, apply to your designs at any point. Hope you found this tutorial of interest. Please subscribe to the Graphic Extras channel, always adding new tutorials about Photoshop, Affinity Photo, Illustrator, Affinity Designer, many, many others. Please add some comments, always appreciated. A dislike or like. Thank you much.